Captain Lee Daho stood on the bridge of his ship looking out at the dark space between two angry alien fleets. His ship, the Harmony Edge, floated in the middle like a small peacekeeper between two giant armies. The Vorth Empire ships looked like huge metal beasts covered in spikes and weapons, while the Kellen ships buzzed around like angry metal insects. Huge metal beasts, covered in spikes and weapons, while the Kellen ships buzzed around like angry metal insects, had been doing this job for 3 years now. Every day brought new fights to stop, new arguments to solve, and new wars to prevent. The galaxy had gotten used to calling humans whenever there was trouble. They knew humans would always try to fix things with words instead of weapons. Park Minji walked up beside him holding her tablet with the latest reports from both sides. She was the best negotiator in human space, everyone said. So the aliens respected her because she never got angry, no matter how much they shouted or threatened. The Vorth were getting ready for another meeting. Park could see their Ambassador General Thok preparing his usual show of anger and threats. He was 8 feet tall, covered in thick green scales, and had claws that could cut through metal. When he got mad, his eyes would glow red, and he would roar so loud it made the walls shake. On the other side, the Kellen ambassador, Queen Zisk, was also preparing. She looked like a giant praying mantis with 4 arms and huge black eyes that never seemed to blink. When she was angry, she would click her sharp teeth together and spray a smell that made everyone feel scared. Both sides had been fighting over the mining rights to 3 small planets for 6 months now. The planets had rare metals that both empires wanted badly. Every time they got close to an agreement, something would go wrong and they would start threatening war again. Lee watched his crew preparing for another long day of peace talks. Lieutenant Yan Hinwu was checking the communication systems to make sure both sides could hear each other clearly. Commander Qin Jaewan was reviewing the latest intelligence reports about troop movements near the disputed worlds. Funny thing was that both alien empires were much stronger than humanity in terms of pure military power. The Vorth had ships that could destroy entire planets, and the Kellen had swarms of fighters that could block out the sun. But they always came to humans when they had problems they could not solve with fighting. Humans had earned a reputation across the galaxy as the species that never gave up on finding peaceful solutions. No matter how angry the aliens got, no matter how many threats they made, humans would just keep talking and trying to find a way for everyone to be happy. Park remembered her first big negotiation. 2 years ago, the Vorth and a bird-like species called the Haken had been ready to start a war that would have killed billions of people. The Haken thought the Vorth had stolen one of their sacred eggs, but it turned out to be a misunderstanding. Park had spent 3 weeks going back and forth between both sides, explaining and translating, until they realized the egg had just gotten lost in a shipping accident. Vorth had been so impressed by her patience that General Thok had given her an honorary scale from his own body. It was considered the highest honor a Vorth could give to an alien. Park kept it on her desk as a reminder that even the angriest beings could learn to trust humans. But lately Lee had been noticing something troubling in the reports from across human space. Pirates were attacking human cargo ships more often. Slavers were targeting human colonies and kidnapping people for their markets. Other species were testing human patience in small ways, seeing how far they could push before humans would finally fight back. The problem was that humans almost never fought back. When pirates attacked human ships, the response would be a rescue mission with strict rules about not hurting anyone unless absolutely necessary. When slavers took human prisoners, the military would negotiate for their release and pay ransoms instead of just attacking the slaver bases. Lee understood why Earth Command made these decisions. Every time humans used violence, it made other species more likely to use violence too. Humans had become the galaxy police because they could solve problems without making them worse. But sometimes he wondered if their reputation for being peaceful was starting to make them look weak. Commander Kim walked over with a concerned look on his face. Captain, we are getting reports from the outer colonies again. More raids on human settlements in the Tau sector. The attackers are using hit-and-run tactics, hitting civilian targets and then disappearing. Before our response teams can arrive, Lee nodded grimly. He had been expecting this. The outer colonies were far from the main human fleet bases, which made them easy targets for anyone who wanted to test human resolve. The attacks were always just bad enough to cause suffering, but not quite bad enough to justify a major military response. Park looked up from her tablet. The pattern is becoming clear, Captain. The raids are too coordinated to be random piracy. Someone is organizing these attacks specifically to see how we will respond. They are testing our limits. Yang turned from his station. Captain, I am getting a priority message from Earth Command. They want to know if we think the current diplomatic approach is still working given the increase in attacks on human targets. Lee thought about this carefully. Earth had built its entire foreign policy around the idea that patience and negotiation could solve any problem. It had worked well for decades and had made humans the most trusted mediators in the galaxy. But the cost was becoming clear as other species started to see human restraint as an invitation to take advantage. The truth was that humans were not actually weak at all. Human ships carried weapons that most aliens had never seen used. Human Marines trained constantly for combat scenarios that they hoped would never happen. The human military had contingency plans for wars that Earth Command prayed they would never have to fight. But the galaxy only saw what humans chose to show them. They saw negotiators and peacekeepers and cargo ships full of aid supplies. They never saw the weapon systems that were kept powered down, or the military exercises that happened in secret, or the soldiers who spent their entire careers training for battles they were not allowed to fight. Dr. Park was studying the latest intelligence reports about the groups behind the colonial raids. Captain, she said quietly, I think we need to consider the possibility that our reputation for restraint is encouraging these attacks. The raiders know we will respond with minimal force, and they are using that knowledge against us. Lee knew she was right, but he also knew that changing course would mean abandoning everything humanity had built in the galaxy. Humans were trusted as mediators precisely because everyone knew they would not use their full strength against weaker opponents. If humans started responding to every provocation with overwhelming force, they would become just another military empire among many. But as he watched the alien fleets positioning themselves for another day of threats and posturing, Lee could not help but wonder how long humanity could maintain this careful balance. The galaxy had gotten comfortable with the idea that humans would always choose peace over war. But comfort could lead to complacency, and complacency could lead to tragedy, and comfort could lead to tragedy. The distant space was filled with the lights of alien warships, all waiting to see what the humans would do next. None of them realized that they were about to find out what happened when humanity finally decided that enough was enough. 3 weeks after the failed peace talks at the neutral zone, everything changed forever. It started on a Tuesday morning when Lieutenant Yang Hyunwoo was monitoring the routine communication channels from his station on the Harmony Edge. He was drinking his morning coffee and checking the usual reports from cargo ships and patrol vessels, when a distress signal cut through the static like a scream. The signal came from the civilian transport New Seoul, a ship carrying refugees from the failed colony on Kepler 7. Most of the passengers were families with children running away from their homes after the mining operation collapsed. They were ordinary people looking for a new start in human space, but they never made it to safety. Yang dropped his coffee cup as he heard the panic in the voice coming through the speakers. This is Captain Ro Tae-jin of the New Seoul. We are under attack by unknown vessels. They have disabled our engines and are demanding we prepare for boarding. We have 300 civilians on board, including 47 children. Please send help. The distress call was being broadcast on an open channel, which meant everyone in the sector could hear it. Yang quickly traced the signal to Kepler Junction, a supposedly neutral area where no military forces were allowed. The New Seoul should have been safe there, but someone had decided that the rules no longer applied. Captain Lee rushed to the bridge when he heard the alarm. Within minutes, the entire Crew was at battle stations, but they were too far away to help. The new Soul was 8 hours away at maximum speed, and from the sound of the distress calls, they did not have 8 hours. What made everything worse was that the attackers were broadcasting their actions across subspace for everyone to see. They wanted the galaxy to watch what they were doing to the helpless human civilians. They were making a show of it like some kind of entertainment. Dayor Park Minji arrived at the bridge just as the first video transmission came through. The main screen showed the interior of the new Soul, where armed Vorth and Kellen soldiers were herding terrified passengers into the cargo bay. The aliens were working together, which was strange since they had been enemies just days before. The lead Vorth was a massive creature with battle scars across his face and arms. He grabbed an elderly human woman by the throat and lifted her off the ground while looking directly into the camera. "Look at this," he said in broken human language. "This is what happens when weak species travel through space without protection. Your people are soft and useless." The Kellen commander was even worse. She used her sharp claws to separate children from their parents, while clicking her teeth in what sounded like laughter. "The little ones will bring good prices in the slave markets," she announced to her troops. "The adults we can use for labor or entertainment, depending on what the buyers want." Park felt sick as she watched the aliens treating human beings like cargo to be sorted and sold. But what made her even more angry was the way they kept looking at the camera as if they were performing for an audience. They knew their actions were being broadcast across the galaxy, and they did not care. Ambassador Choyang was in the Galactic Council chambers on the station orbiting Centauri Prime when the broadcast reached the diplomatic channels. She watched in horror as the screen showed Vorth soldiers forcing human families to their knees while Kellen warriors prepared chains and restraints. The reaction in the chamber was mixed. Some of the alien delegates looked uncomfortable and whispered among themselves. Others seemed almost amused by the spectacle. A few even made jokes about human weakness and inability to protect their own people. The Heckin delegate clicked his beak and said to his neighbor, "I told you the humans would not last long as a spacefaring species. They are too soft for the real galaxy." The Zephyrian ambassador nodded in agreement and added, "Soon they will learn that peace only works when you have the strength to enforce it." Choi stood up from her seat and demanded that the council take immediate action to stop the attack, but the response was slow and bureaucratic. The Vorth and Kellen representatives claimed they had no knowledge of the raid and suggested it might be the work of rogue elements beyond their control, while the politicians talked and made excuses. The situation on the new Soul was getting worse. The raiders had divided the passengers into groups and were discussing their fate as if they were deciding what to have for dinner. The children were crying and calling for their parents, who were being held in separate areas of the ship back on the Harmony Edge. Captain Lee received a priority message from Earth Command. The transmission was brief and came directly from the highest levels of human government. Lee read it twice to make sure he understood correctly, then called his senior officers to the briefing room. The message was unlike anything Earth Command had ever sent before. For decades, human military responses had been carefully measured and restrained. Every action required approval from multiple committees, and every use of force had to be justified in detailed reports. But this message was different. It contained new authorization codes that Lee had never seen before, and orders that seemed to come from a completely different version of humanity. The language was simple and direct, with none of the usual diplomatic careful wording that filled most military communications. Zhang stared at the message in disbelief. "Sir, this cannot be right. These codes would authorize the use of weapon systems that are not supposed to exist. The database shows our ships as having only basic defensive capabilities." Lee looked at his communications officer with a grim expression. "Lieutenant, what you are seeing is the difference between what we show the galaxy and what we actually carry. Every human ship has been built with hidden capabilities that we hoped we would never need to use." Commander Kim pulled up the ship schematics on his tablet. "Captain, I am seeing weapon systems and defensive measures that were never included in any of the manuals we studied at the academy. How long have we been carrying this kind of firepower? Answer was that human ships had always been far more dangerous than they appeared. Decades of careful planning had gone into making sure that other species would underestimate human military capabilities. The galaxy saw cargo, ships and research vessels and diplomatic cruisers, but they had never seen what those ships could become when the safety locks were removed. Dr. Park tried one last desperate attempt at diplomacy. She sent urgent messages to both Vorth and Kellen, High Command begging them to call off their raiders and return the human civilians unharmed. Her messages were detailed and reasonable, offering compensation and trade agreements in exchange for the safe return of the passengers. The response from both alien governments was silence. They were too busy enjoying their test of human resolve to bother with negotiations. The Vorth Empire and Kellen Confederation had decided that humans needed to learn their place in the galaxy, and they were willing to use innocent civilians to teach that lesson. Hours passed, and the situation on the New Sol continued to deteriorate. The raiders were becoming more violent and cruel as they realized that no rescue was coming. The aliens had studied human response patterns and expected a negotiation team to arrive with offers of money and trade deals. What they did not expect was the fleet that was already moving toward Kepler Junction. Human ships from across 3 sectors were changing course and heading toward the crisis zone. The vessels were running silent with their identification systems turned off and their true capabilities hidden behind false readings. The moment that changed everything came when 8-year-old Han Ninseo called out for her mother as she was dragged away by Kellen slavers. Her terrified voice carried across the subspace broadcast and reached every corner of human space. That single cry of a frightened child became the sound that ended humanity patience forever. In command centers across human territory, military officers who had spent their entire careers restraining themselves suddenly received orders they had been waiting for their whole lives. The galaxy was about to discover what humans looked like when they stopped being nice. The transformation began the moment little Han Ninseo cried for her mother. Across human space, something changed in a way that made the galaxy hold its breath. Ships that had been peacefully going about their business suddenly turned and headed toward Kepler Junction like metal sharks. Sensing blood in the water, Captain Seo Jung-min was commanding the heavy cruiser Iron Will when the activation codes reached his ship. He had been escorting a diplomatic mission to the Andromedan colonies when every screen on his bridge suddenly flashed red with priority override messages that he had never seen before. The Iron Will had served for 5 years as a peaceful escort vessel. Its mission was to protect diplomats and show other species that humans preferred talking to fighting. The ship looked like most human vessels, clean and simple, with no obvious weapons or threatening features. Other species had inspected it many times and always concluded that humans built boring, peaceful ships. But now as Seo entered the activation codes, his engineering officer Lim Jun was staring at her console in amazement. "Captain," she said, her voice shaking, "the ship is showing systems that are not in any of our manuals. There are weapon arrays built into the hull structure that have been hidden behind false panels." The transformation was happening everywhere across human space. Trade ships that looked like simple cargo haulers suddenly deployed gun turrets that had been disguised as communication arrays. Research vessels revealed that their scanning equipment could be converted into devastating energy weapons in less than 10 minutes. Lieutenant Commander Bak Dong-yoon was aboard the exploration ship Peaceful Star when it received its new orders. The ship had spent 3 years mapping uninhabited systems and cataloging new planets for possible colonization. But when the activation sequence began, the ship revealed its true nature. The mapping sensors retracted into the hull and were replaced by targeting systems that could track 1,000 different objects at once. Geological survey equipment transformed into plasma cannons that could melt through ship armor like butter. The peaceful research vessel became a predator, designed to hunt other ships What shocked the crew members most was realizing that their own government had been preparing for this moment for decades. Every human ship launched in the past 50 years had been built with hidden military capabilities that even the crews did not know about. The galaxy had been seeing only what humans wanted them to see. Engineer Lim worked frantically in the depths of the iron will, activating weapon systems that made her hands shake. The humans had not just been hiding a few extra guns, they had been concealing technology that was decades ahead of what other species possessed. Stealth systems alone were beyond anything the galaxy had seen before. Human ships could become invisible to sensors, not just by hiding their energy signatures, but by bending light around themselves like ghosts in space. The aliens had never detected these capabilities because humans had never used them. Back at Kepler Junction, the Vorth and Kellen raiders were enjoying their success. They had captured over 300 human civilians and were already discussing how to divide the profits from selling them into slavery. The alien commanders were making jokes about human weakness and planning their next raid. Commander Thrak of the Vorth forces was a veteran of many battles against species that fought back hard. He was used to desperate last stands and surprise attacks from desperate enemies. But humans had never fought back with real force, so he expected the usual pattern of negotiation and ransom payments. Queen Visk of the Kellen raiders was even more confident. She had studied human military responses for years and knew exactly how they would react. A small rescue fleet would arrive with minimal weapons and careful rules of engagement. They would try to negotiate and would eventually pay whatever price was demanded. Both alien commanders had positioned their forces to deal with the expected human response. They had set up defensive positions and prepared for a long siege while they used the civilian hostages as bargaining chips. Their ships were arranged in a formation that would make any rescue attempt costly and difficult. What they did not expect was the fleet that materialized out of hyperspace like a nightmare made real. Over 300 human vessels appeared in perfect attack formation surrounding the alien raiders so completely that escape was impossible. The Coma human ships were not arranged for negotiation or rescue. They were positioned for total destruction. The formation was so precise and overwhelming that experienced alien military officers immediately recognized it as the setup for a massacre. Commander Thrak tried to contact the human fleet expecting to hear the usual diplomatic language about peaceful resolution and minimizing casualties. Instead, he heard a voice that was cold and mechanical, like a machine announcing the weather. "This is Admiral Kang Sun-hee of the human fleet. You have exactly 1 minute to release all civilian hostages and prepare for boarding. Any resistance will result in the complete destruction of your vessels. Any harm to hostages will result in consequences that will follow you to whatever afterlife your species believes." The alien raiders suddenly realized that something was very wrong. The human fleet was not behaving like any human force they had ever encountered. There were no negotiations, no offers of ransom payment, no careful rules about avoiding unnecessary violence. Queen Visk tried to threaten the hostages, hoping to force the humans back into their usual pattern of restraint. She grabbed young Han Minzeo and held a weapon to the child head while broadcasting her demands for safe passage and payment. Response from the human fleet was immediate and terrifying. Every human ship targeted Queen Visk location with enough firepower to turn her ship into vapor. The targeting systems were so precise that they could have killed her without harming anyone else in the same room. But Admiral Kang had different plans. She wanted Queen Visk and Commander Thrak to survive because they needed to carry a message back to their people. The galaxy had to understand that the rules had changed, and that required witnesses. The human fleet moved with precision that amazed even experienced military observers. Ships that had appeared to be simple cargo haulers revealed themselves as mobile weapons platforms with firepower that exceeded most battleships. Research vessels deployed exotic weapons that the aliens had never seen before. What terrified the raiders most was the silence from the human fleet. There were no battle cries, no emotional outbursts, no signs of anger or revenge. The humans were destroying their enemies with the same calm efficiency they brought to every other task. The alien forces tried to fight back, but their weapons seemed to have no effect on the human ships. Energy blasts that should have crippled vessels simply disappeared into shield systems that absorbed the attacks and converted them into power for the human weapons. Within minutes, the entire raider fleet was disabled, their weapons destroyed, and their engines offline. The human Marines boarded every ship with mechanical precision, rescuing hostages and capturing alien crew members without wasting a single movement. Most frightening thing about the human assault was not the violence, but the complete lack of emotion. The Marines moved through the alien ships like they were performing a training exercise. Their faces showed no anger, no desire for revenge, just professional determination to complete their mission. Commander Thrak found himself face to face with Major Bak Dong-Yun, expecting to see the rage of a species finally pushed too far. Instead, he saw something much more terrifying: the calm professionalism of predators who had finally decided to stop pretending to be prey. The battle at Kepler Junction lasted exactly 17 minutes. When it was over, every human hostage had been rescued, every alien raider had been captured, and the galaxy had learned that humanity had been holding back for 50 years. The message spread through alien space faster than light itself. Species that had grown comfortable exploiting human mercy suddenly found themselves wondering what other capabilities humans might be hiding. The galaxy would never look at a human ship the same way again. The aftermath of Kepler Junction sent shockwaves through the galaxy that reached every corner of known space. Admiral Kang Sun-hee stood on the bridge of her command ship, Retribution, watching as her Marines completed the rescue operations with mechanical precision. Every human civilian had been recovered, and every alien raider was now in custody awaiting judgment. Rescued hostages were transferred to medical ships for treatment and psychological care. The children who had been terrorized by their captors were given special attention by human counselors who specialized in helping victims of trauma. Little Han Min Seo was reunited with her mother in a scene that brought tears to the eyes of hardened soldiers. But the rescued civilians were not the only ones receiving careful attention. The captured raiders were being processed with the same thorough efficiency that humans brought to everything they did. Each alien prisoner was documented, cataloged, and prepared for the trials that would determine their fate. Major Bak Dong-Yun supervised the processing of the Vorth and Kellen prisoners. His Marines had captured over 200 alien raiders without killing a single one. This was not mercy, but calculated strategy. Survivors needed to return to their people with the message that humanity had changed. Commander Thrak of the Vorth forces found himself in a holding cell designed specifically for his species. The cell was not uncomfortable, but it was clearly built by people who understood exactly how to contain Vorth prisoners. The walls were made of materials that could withstand his claws, and the security systems monitored his every movement. Queen Visk of the Kellen Raiders was in a similar situation. Her cell was designed to contain insectoid species and included features that showed humans had studied Kellen biology very carefully. The message was clear: humans had been preparing for this moment for a very long time. The trials began within days of the rescue. Admiral Kang had established a military tribunal with judges who had been specially trained in interspecies law. The proceedings were broadcast across the galaxy so that every species could see how humans dealt with those who harmed their people. The evidence was overwhelming. Video recordings from the new Seoul showed the raiders separating families and threatening children. Testimony from the rescued hostages detailed the cruel treatment they had received. The aliens had documented their own crimes by broadcasting their actions across subspace. What surprised many observers was how fair the trials were, despite the horrible nature of the crimes. The human judges followed proper legal procedures and allowed the defendants to present their cases. Defense attorneys were provided for aliens who could not afford representation, but fairness did not mean leniency. The sentences were swift and absolute. Raiders who had threatened children received life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Those who had actually harmed civilians faced execution by methods that were quick and painless. But the galaxy watched in fascination as humans demonstrated that their justice system could be both merciful and ruthless. The same species that had spent decades seeking peaceful solutions was now showing that they could deliver consequences with mathematical precision. Commander Thrak was sentenced to life imprisonment on a prison planet where he would spend his remaining years in solitary reflection. His crimes against human children had sealed his fate, and he would never again see his homeworld or his family. Queen Visk received a death sentence that was carried out exactly 72 hours after her trial ended. Her last words were broadcast to her people, warning them that humans were not the weak species they had appeared to be. The Kellen Confederation received the message and immediately began reconsidering their entire relationship with Earth. The news of the trials spread through alien space like wildfire. Species that had been planning their own tests of human patience suddenly found themselves canceling those operations. Trade agreements that had been heavily weighted against human interests were hastily renegotiated. Hecken, who had been preparing to raid human mining colonies in the Outer Rim, suddenly discovered urgent business elsewhere in the galaxy. The Zephyrians, who had been demanding tribute from human merchants, quietly withdrew their demands and offered favorable trade terms instead. The most significant changes were happening in the governments of the Vorth Empire and Kellen Confederation. The leaders who had authorized the attack on the New Sol found themselves facing angry populations who did not want to be the next target of human retaliation. Within weeks, both alien governments underwent rapid political changes. The war leaders who had seen humans as easy targets were replaced by more moderate politicians who understood the new reality. These new leaders competed with each other to offer the most favorable terms for renewed relationships with humanity. The Vorth Empire offered to pay massive reparations for the attack and proposed a new treaty that would give humans favorable trading rights throughout Vorth space. The Kellen Confederation went even further, offering to share advanced technology in exchange for assurance that humans would not seek revenge against their homeworld Earth. Command found itself in the unusual position of having to decide which favorable offers to accept. Decades of being taken advantage of were suddenly replaced by desperate attempts from alien species to curry favor with humanity. Dr. Park Minji established new protocols for human diplomatic relations. The days of endless patience and unlimited tolerance were officially over. Human negotiators now came to the table with clearly defined limits and explicitly stated consequences for crossing those limits. New diplomatic approach was simple and direct. Humans would continue to seek peaceful solutions to problems, but they would no longer allow themselves to be taken advantage of. Any species that threatened human civilians would face immediate and overwhelming retaliation. Ambassador Choi Yoziu returned to the Galactic Council chambers to find a completely different atmosphere. The same delegates who had laughed at human weakness now listened carefully to every word from Earth representatives. The jokes about human softness had been replaced by nervous respect. The Galactic Council passed new resolutions, condemning attacks on civilian shipping and establishing stronger penalties for piracy and slavery. The vote was unanimous as every species present wanted to be seen as supportive of human interests. Captain Lee Daeho found his role changing as well. The Harmony Edge was reassigned from diplomatic missions to patrol duty in the former neutral zones. The ship was renamed the Final Warning, and its mission changed from mediation to enforcement. Outer Rim territories that had been plagued by raiders and slavers suddenly became peaceful and safe. Pirate attacks on human shipping dropped to zero as word spread about what had happened at Kepler Junction. The slave markets that had been buying human captives quietly closed their doors. Perhaps the most important change was in how humans saw themselves. For decades they had accepted the role of galaxy peacekeepers who absorbed abuse in order to maintain stability. The attack on the New Sol had shown them that sometimes peace required the willingness to fight. Human military began openly displaying capabilities that had been hidden for decades. New ship designs were released that showed the true extent of human military technology. Training exercises were conducted in public, where alien observers could see what human forces were really capable of. The message was clear to everyone in the galaxy: humanity had not been weak, they had been choosing to be gentle. That choice had been revoked and would not be offered again. The galaxy would have to learn to coexist with a humanity that no longer hid its strength. In the months that followed, Kepler Junction became a pilgrimage site for human families who wanted to honor the moment when their species finally stood up for itself. The wreckage of the alien raider ships was left in orbit as a monument to the consequences of pushing humanity too far. Galaxies settled into a new normal where humans were no longer seen as easy targets, but as sleeping giants who had finally awakened. The lesson had been learned, and it would not be forgotten. 1 year after Kepler Junction, the galaxy had settled into what historians would later call the New Human Era. Captain Lee Daeho walked through the corridors of his ship, which was no longer called the Harmony Edge, but had been renamed the Final. Warning: the change in name reflected the change in humanity itself. Ship now patrolled the space lanes that had once been hunting grounds for pirates and slavers. Where alien raiders had once attacked human vessels with impunity, there was now only peaceful traffic moving safely between the stars. The transformation was complete and permanent. Ambassador Choi Soo-young entered the Galactic Council chambers for the first session of the new year. She noticed immediately how different her reception was compared to the old days. The same alien delegates who had once barely acknowledged her presence now stood respectfully when she entered the room. The Heckin delegate who had once made jokes about human weakness now approached her with nervous politeness. "Honored Ambassador," he said, his beak clicking anxiously, "my government wishes to discuss new trade agreements that would be beneficial to both our species. We have products that might interest Earth." The Zephyrian representative was even more eager to please. She had prepared a detailed presentation about how her people could assist human expansion into new star systems. The same species that had once demanded tribute from human merchants was now offering to work for humans as guides and translators. Dark Minji had established the new protocols that governed all human diplomatic relations. The rules were simple and clear. Humans would negotiate fairly and honor their agreements, but they would no longer tolerate being taken advantage of. Any species that threatened human interests would face immediate consequences. The new approach was working better than anyone had expected. Disputes that might have dragged on for months under the old system were now resolved quickly when alien species realized that humans were serious about their deadlines. Trade negotiations that had once heavily favored alien interests were now balanced and fair. Captain Izio Jungmin commanded the Iron Will on patrol duty in the outer RIMEM territories. The areas that had once been plagued by constant raids and attacks were now some of the safest regions in the galaxy. His ship rarely had to use its weapons because the mere presence of human forces was enough to maintain order. The hidden weapon systems that had shocked the galaxy were no longer hidden. Human ships openly displayed their true capabilities and conducted training exercises where alien observers could see exactly what humanity was capable of. The galaxy had learned to respect human strength. Engineer Lim Jun worked on developing new technologies that would keep human forces ahead of any potential threats. The research and development programs that had been secret for decades were now openly funded and staffed. The message was clear: humans would never again be caught unprepared. The most significant changes were happening in alien governments across the galaxy. The Fourth Empire had completely restructured its military doctrine after learning what happened when humans decided to fight back. Their new leaders were moderate politicians who understood that cooperation was more profitable than conflict. The Kellan Confederation had gone even further in reforming their society. The cultural practice of taking slaves from weaker species had been officially banned, and their government had paid massive reparations to human families affected by the raids. Their new queen was a reformer who preached cooperation and mutual benefit. But the Changes went deeper than just government policies. The ordinary citizens of alien species had learned to see humans differently. Children in alien schools were taught new lessons about the importance of respecting peaceful species, because they might not be as helpless as they appeared. Lieutenant Yang Hinwu monitored communications from his station and noticed how different the chatter had become. Alien ship captains who encountered human vessels were polite and respectful. Cargo haulers gave human ships priority in shipping lanes and offered assistance whenever it was needed. Transformation was most obvious in the outer colonies, where human settlers had once lived in fear of raids and attacks. Families like the passengers of the New Soul could now travel safely through space, knowing that the galaxy respected human strength little. Han Minseo, who had been the catalyst for humanity change, was now attending school on New Terra, a colony world that had been established in the aftermath of Kepler Junction. She was learning about the history of human exploration and the role her terrified cry had played in changing the galaxy forever. The New Soul itself had been converted into a memorial ship that traveled between human worlds, telling the story of the day humanity tolerance finally broke. Veterans of the rescue mission served as guides, explaining to visitors how the galaxy had learned to respect human resolve. Major Bak Dong-yoon had been promoted to colonel and now commanded the Human Colonial Defense Force. His Marines were stationed throughout human space, ready to respond instantly to any threat against civilian populations. The days when human colonies were seen as easy targets were over forever. Most important lesson the galaxy had learned was philosophical rather than military. Other species began to examine their own assumptions about strength and weakness. Many peaceful civilizations realized that they too might be hiding capabilities that their enemies had never seen. The concept of restraint as a choice rather than weakness became a subject of study in alien universities. Military academies across the galaxy added courses about the danger of underestimating apparently passive species. The humans had taught everyone that the most dangerous enemies might be those who choose not to fight. Commander Kim Jae-won reviewed intelligence reports from across the galaxy and found a pattern that would have been impossible before. Kepler Junction crime rates in areas with human presence had dropped dramatically, while economic activity and peaceful trade had increased significantly. Galaxy was becoming a safer and more prosperous place because one species had finally decided to stop tolerating abuse. The lesson had been learned by everyone. Pirates turned to legitimate trade, slavers found other occupations, and aggressive military commanders were replaced by diplomatic leaders. Admiral Kang Sun-hee looked out at the stars from her flagship and reflected on how much had changed. Her fleet was no longer hidden in the shadows, waiting for authorization to reveal their capabilities. Human military forces now operated openly, ensuring that the peace was maintained through strength rather than weakness. The children of the galaxy were growing up in a different universe than their parents had known. Human strength was now an accepted fact that influenced every political decision and military strategy. The age of taking advantage of human patience was over and would never return. Earth itself had changed as well. The planet that had once been seen as the home of galaxy peacekeepers was now recognized as the capital of a species that could project power across the stars when necessary. Human colonies were established with confidence, and human explorers ventured into unknown regions without fear. The transformation was complete and irreversible. Humanity had evolved from victims who absorbed abuse in the name of peace into protectors who maintained order through the threat of overwhelming retaliation. The galaxy had learned to respect this new reality and prosper under it. Captain Lee stood on his bridge, looking out at the peaceful stars, and remembered the old days when human ships were targets for anyone who wanted to test their luck. Those days were gone forever, replaced by an era when humanity was respected and left in peace. The lesson of Kepler Junction had been learned by every species in the galaxy. Some lines should never be crossed, and humanity tolerance had been one of them. The cost of learning that lesson had been paid in alien blood, and the memory would last for generations. In the end, the galaxy had become A better place because one species had finally decided that enough was enough. The stars themselves seemed brighter, knowing that human children could travel safely between them, and that human families could build their futures without fear. This age of human patience was over, and the age of human strength had begun forever.